It's obvious that we disagree on many things. We knew that coming in here. But it's important to clarify just what it is that we disagree on. Contrary to popular belief, Christians are not at all opposed to science, nor is Christianity at odds with science. That's because despite what the naturalists would have you believe, science does not equal naturalism. Naturalism is a philosophical belief system as much as Christian theism is. Science is simply the study of the natural world. Or as one dictionary puts it, any of the sciences, physics, chemistry, or biology, the natural sciences, that deal with matter, energy, and their interrelations and transformations, or with objectively measurable phenomena. Natural science studies the natural world, gathering data and performing experiments. It tells us the what of reality. As Chuck Colson reminds us, many pioneers of modern science were Christians, including Copernicus, Isaac Newton, and Carl Linnaeus. And they were convinced that their discoveries were, in the words of Psalm 19, declaring the glory of God. This means that what we disagree on is not the natural world, what our eyes can see. In fact, the Christian delights in the natural world, and Christian theology teaches the restoration of not only man through the finished work of Jesus Christ, but also the restoration of the natural world, a new heavens and a new earth. Furthermore, what we disagree on is not the evidence. Evidence in itself doesn't prove anything. It's just stuff. The dictionary definition of evidence is a thing or things helpful in forming a conclusion or judgment. Evidence is a bloody knife, a busted-in back door, and a dead man in the basement. In our case, we both look at the night sky and agree that there are stars up there. We disagree how they came to be and how old they are. We both look at the fossil record and agree that dinosaurs once existed. But we interpret that evidence to remarkably different conclusions. Fundamentally, then, what we disagree on is the interpretation of the natural world. The reason we interpret the same evidence so differently is that we each approach the evidence with two entirely different worldviews. Both our worldviews each have two entirely different starting assumptions, neither of which can be proven. The Christian approaches the natural world with the assumption that God exists, and He has spoken to us truthfully in the Bible. But this, the Christian cannot conclusively prove. The naturalist approaches the natural world with the assumption that nothing exists outside the material natural order. Thereby, the notion of God's existence or He having spoken truthfully in the Bible is rejected. In the place of divine revelation, the naturalist contends that man's own free thought is sufficient in correctly understanding and interpreting the world he sees without regard to God's revealed truth. But his starting assumption cannot be conclusively proven either. Is there any laboratory test that could confirm that the universe arose from meaningless matter and motion? Certainly not. As Richard Dawkins himself agrees, naturalism cannot prove that nothing exists outside the material natural order. This brings us to the one thing that both Christians and naturalists have paradoxically in common: faith. Both of our worldviews, in fact all worldviews, require a starting point that can neither be conclusively proven nor disproven. This starting point, presupposition, must be accepted not on the basis of evidence, but ultimately on the basis of faith. The dictionary definition of faith is firm belief in something for which there is no proof. As I have demonstrated, the starting point of naturalism cannot be proven. Keeping in mind that faith is firm belief in something for which there is no proof, listen to these dogmatic statements of faith. Richard Dawkins says, even if there were no actual evidence in favor of the Darwinian theory, we should still be justified in preferring it over all rival theories. He's not the only naturalist to admit that his worldview is not founded upon evidence. Harvard biologist and naturalist Richard Lomond admitted that naturalism is based in faith and not evidence in an article in the New York Review of Books a few years back. Lomond said, though not without its faults, science is to be preferred over any form of supernaturalism. Why? Because, quote, we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism, end quote. He says again, I quote, "It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the world. On the contrary," he says, "we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations." Nancy Pearcey points out that in 1999, a Kansas State University professor published a letter in the journal Nature stating, quote, "Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic." End quote. Even if there is no evidence in favor of Darwinism, and if all the evidence favors intelligent design, still we are not allowed to consider it in science. Clearly, the issue is not fundamentally a matter of evidence at all, but of a prior philosophical commitment. Christopher Hitchens says, "There is no form of persuasion that would make me assent to the proposition that God exists." The definition of faith, again, is firm belief in something for which there is no proof. Naturalism is not innocent fact-finding. Science is and can be innocent fact-finding. Science is the what of the natural world. Naturalism is the philosophical why of the natural world. So is Christianity. It is on this level that we disagree. As for the age of the universe, I will address that in my conclusion. But as to the question of if there is a benevolent God, we wouldn't have diseases. I understand that point, but I think that there's an implied premise there that's not appropriate at all. The implied premise in claiming God is in fact omnibenevolent, that is true. But the premise behind that statement Johnny made is that a good God would eliminate all evil. But if God did eliminate all evil, he would eliminate all people immediately. Instead, a good God would eliminate evil as far as he can without either losing a greater good or bringing about a greater evil. Therefore, if God knows that an evil will accomplish a greater good than the alternative good, he will always choose the greater good for us, which is precisely why he is a good God. As for miracles and supernaturalism, miracles are not at all irrational. They don't break any of the laws of logic. He said, if you don't have evidence, don't make the claim. I'll address that in my conclusion. And as far as the common objection that just because Christians want there to be a God, want to have hope, wanting something is not proof that it doesn't exist.
We're getting to close to the end of the debate itself proper. With 5 minutes from John, followed by a final 5 minutes from Ed.